Hey everyone, welcome back to News and Views. I'm Derek, and with me again is our amazing expert, ready to dive deep into another fascinating topic.
Absolutely. Always excited to be here on the deep dive, ready to get into it.
So today, folks, we're tackling something that's been making headlines and could seriously impact all of us. Trump's trade war.
Uh-huh. It's a big one for sure.
It is, and we'll break it down so everyone understands what's at stake. Basically, President Trump slapped tariffs on goods from, well, a lot of places.
Canada, Mexico, China, big players.
Right, and that means your trip to the grocery store might get pricier, some people could be out of a job, and even the mighty US dollar might lose some of its shine.
Yeah, there are a lot of potential consequences, but we'll unpack those one by one so everyone's up to speed.
Perfect. So first things first, what exactly are tariffs, and why are they such a big deal?
Good question. Essentially, a tariff is like a tax on imports. It's a way for a country to make goods from other countries more expensive.
So like if I want to buy a fancy new TV from, say, Japan,
Mm.
and there's a tariff on it,
Then that TV is going to cost you more than it would without the tariff.
and why would any country want to do that? Make things more expensive, I mean.
Well, the idea is to protect domestic industries. If
Yeah.
that Japanese TV is more expensive, maybe you'll buy an American-made TV instead.
Okay, makes sense. So it's about giving your own companies a bit of an advantage.
Right. It's about trying to boost domestic production and create jobs.
All right, but then why all the talk about a trade war? I mean, if it helps your own country.
Yeah, see, that's where things get tricky. When one country puts up tariffs, other countries often retaliate with tariffs of their own, and then things can escalate quickly.
Like a tit for tat kind of thing.
Precisely. It's like a back and forth. Tariffs get higher and higher, and everyone involved ends up paying more for goods.
So it's like a lose-lose situation in the end.
That's the risk with trade wars, absolutely.
And that's what we're seeing now with Trump's tariffs.
Yep. He imposed a 25% tariff on a whole bunch of goods coming from Canada and Mexico.
25%? That's a pretty big chunk.
Yeah, it is. And it hits things like steel and aluminum, but also consumer goods, things people buy every day.
Like what? Give us some examples.
Well, we're talking everything from cars and car parts to food and beverages. Your everyday shopping list could be affected.
So my morning coffee could get more expensive because of this.
Potentially, if those coffee beans are coming from, say, Mexico.
Okay, I'm starting to see why this is a big deal. And Canada and Mexico, what did they do? Just sit back and take it.
Oh, not at all. They hit back with their own tariffs on U.S. goods.
Seriously. Like what?
Well, Canada went after things like bourbon,
Yeah.
whiskey from Kentucky, and even orange juice from Florida.
There's two choices.
Yeah, there's a strategy there. They're targeting goods that are important to Trump's political base, trying to apply pressure.
So this is about more than just economics. It's about politics, too.
Oh, absolutely. These tariffs are like chess moves, each one carefully calculated to try and get an advantage.
Wow, this is getting complicated. And what about Mexico? What did they do?
Their response has been a little less clear-cut. They've threatened tariffs but haven't laid out specifics yet.
So a bit of a waiting game.
It seems so, and that uncertainty is causing a lot of anxiety for Mexican businesses.
I bet. Their economy is pretty tied to the U.S., right?
Absolutely.
So these tariffs, this back and forth, what's it all mean for the average person? Is this something we should be worried about?
That's a good question, and it's something we'll explore more in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground, but I think the big takeaway here is that these tariffs are a big deal. They can mean higher prices at the store, potential job losses, and they're definitely shaking things up in the global economy.
Exactly. And in the next part, we'll delve deeper into those potential consequences and what they could mean for you and me.
Sounds good. Stick around, folks. We'll be right back after a short break.
Welcome back, everyone.
All right, so before the break, we were talking about how these tariffs are like this big chess game with Canada, Mexico, and China all making strategic moves. But how does this all connect to the U.S. dollar and its power in the world?
Okay, so the US dollar right now, it's like the king of the currencies. Most international trade happens in dollars. It's like the default, the go-to for most countries.
So why is that? What makes the dollar so special?
Well, for one, the US economy is huge, and it's been stable, relatively speaking, for a long time. That creates trust. People trust the dollar. They believe it will hold its value.
So it's like a safe debt.
Yeah, you could say that. And that trust, that stability, it gives the US a lot of power on the world stage.
Okay, so how do these tariffs play into all of this?
Well, some experts think these tariffs could weaken the dollar in the long run.
Really? How so?
Think about it. If the U.S. keeps slapping tariffs on its trading partners, they might start looking for other ways to do business.
Like what? What are the alternatives?
Well, there's the euro, of course, and then there's this group of countries called BRICS.
BRICS. That sounds familiar.
Yeah, we mentioned them briefly before the break. It stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa.
Right. Those big up-and-coming economies.
Exactly. And they've been pushing for alternatives to the US dollar for a while now. They want to create a system where the US doesn't have so much control.
And these tariffs are helping them do that.
In a way, yeah. These tariffs are giving BRICS more ammunition in their argument. They can say, see, the U.S. isn't reliable, they're unpredictable, let's move away from the dollar.
So what happens if the dollar loses its top spot? Does that mean it's worthless?
No, not worthless, but it could lose some of its value. Think about supply and demand.
Like if fewer people want to use dollars, their value goes down.
Exactly. And a weaker dollar means imports get more expensive for Americans. Everything from clothes to cars could cost more.
Okay, so that's not good for the average person trying to make ends meet.
Definitely not.
But the US dollar isn't going to collapse overnight, right?
No, it's not going to be like that. It's a slow process. But it's something to watch closely because a weaker dollar would have big consequences for the U.S. economy.
So these tariffs are like a gamble, potentially hurting the U.S. economy in the long run.
That's one way to look at it. Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about the impact on people like you and me. Like, how will these tariffs affect us directly?
Yeah, that's what I want to know. What does all this mean for my wallet?
Well, as we touched on earlier, one of the most direct impacts is higher prices.
So everything's going to cost more.
Not everything, but many things. When the U.S. puts tariffs on goods coming from, say, Mexico, those Mexican businesses have to raise their prices to make up for the added cost.
And then those higher prices get passed on to us, the consumers.
Right,
So we end up paying more for the same stuff.
basically. And those price increases can add up.
So we're talking groceries, gas, clothes,
Yeah, potentially all of that. And it's not just about the stuff we buy, it's also about jobs.
jobs. How do tariffs affect jobs?
Well, when goods get more expensive because of tariffs, people might buy less of them. And if people are buying less, businesses might have to cut back, lay off workers, or even close down.
It's definitely not good.
No, it's not. And it can happen on both sides of the border. American workers can lose jobs if U.S. businesses are hurt by retaliatory tariffs. And workers in other countries can lose jobs if their products become too expensive for Americans to buy.
So everyone loses in the end.
Pretty much.
This all sounds pretty bleak. Are there any potential upsides to these trade wars?
Well, some people argue that these tariffs could force the U.S. to become more self-sufficient, to rely less on other countries for goods.
So, like, make more stuff here in America.
Exactly. The idea is to bring back manufacturing jobs, boost domestic industries.
But is that realistic? I mean, can the U.S. really make everything it needs?
It's a complex issue. There are a lot of factors to consider, but it's definitely a debate worth having.
Okay, so we've talked about the potential downsides. Higher prices, job losses, a weaker dollar. And we've touched on the idea that maybe, just maybe, these tariffs could lead to more domestic production in the long run.
Right.
But I think the big question here is it worth the risk? Are these tariffs really the best way to achieve these goals? And if not, what's the alternative?
That's a great question, and one we'll tackle head on in the final part of our deep dive. So we've talked about potential upsides and downsides, but the big question is, are these tariffs really the best way to go about things?
Like, is there another way to achieve these goals without triggering a full-blown trade war? You know, one that hurts everyone in the process.
That's the key, right? Finding solutions that are mutually beneficial.
Okay, so what does that look like? What are the alternatives to this tit-for-tat tariff battle?
Well, one option is negotiation and diplomacy. You know, sitting down with your trading partners, talking things out, trying to find common ground.
So instead of throwing up trade barriers, you tear them down through dialogue and compromise.
Exactly. And this can lead to trade agreements that benefit all parties involved.
So it's like, instead of each country trying to go it alone and protect their own interests at all costs, they work together to create a system where everyone wins.
Right. It's about realizing that in today's globalized world, our economies are interconnected. What happens in one country affects others.
So it's like we're all in this together.
Exactly. And there are already institutions in place that can help facilitate this kind of cooperation, like the World Trade Organization, the WTO.
Right, the WTO, we mentioned that earlier. That's where countries can go to resolve trade disputes and try to establish fair rules for global trade, right?
Exactly. It's like a referee for international trade, trying to ensure that things are fair and balanced.
So going to the WTO, that's one way to avoid these trade wars.
It's definitely a more constructive approach than just slapping tariffs on each other.
Okay, so cooperation, communication, working within established systems like the WTO, these are all potential paths to a more stable and mutually beneficial global economy.
Right. It's about recognizing that we all have a stake in this, that a healthy global economy benefits everyone.
And ultimately, isn't that what we all want? A world where everyone has the opportunity to thrive and prosper.
Absolutely. And I think that's a message worth emphasizing, especially in today's world where there's so much division and conflict.
Well said. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. The tariffs, the retaliation, the potential impact on the US dollar, the global economy, and of course the average person. We've explored the potential consequences, both good and bad, of these protectionist policies, and we've highlighted the importance of cooperation and diplomacy in navigating the complex world of international trade.
It's a complex issue for sure, but I hope our listeners feel a little more informed and empowered to engage in these important conversations.
That's what we aim for here on the Deep Dive. We want to equip our audience with the knowledge and insights they need to understand the world around them and make informed decisions. So as always, folks, stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged. Thanks for joining us.